The alarm on my wrist buzzed twice, which meant one thing: the vote was over. I was standing in the corridor outside the great chamber of the Galactic Council when the doors opened and a wall of cold air hit my face. Delegates from 100 worlds walked past me without looking. None of them said a word. That silence told me everything I needed to know before anyone spoke it out loud. My name is Daniel Cross, and I was the last human allowed inside that chamber before the doors sealed for the final vote. I was not a soldier. I was not a scientist. I was simply the one who carried messages between Earth and the Council, because someone had to stand in that room and watch what they decided about us. A tall alien with silver skin and no visible mouth approached me. His name was Vel Thurak, and he was the Speaker of the Council. He held a thin data slate in his long fingers and offered it to me without ceremony. "It is done," he said, through the small translator device clipped near his throat. "Earth is no longer a member of this council. Your species is banished from galactic space, effective at the next solar rotation." I took the slate. My hands did not shake, though I expected them to. I read the words slowly, because I wanted to remember exactly how they were written. "Banished," I repeated. "Not restricted, not fined, not warned. Banished." "Your people were warned many times," Vel Thurak said. "You built weapons capable of splitting moons. You refused to disarm even after 3 formal requests. Other species fear what your kind might become if left unchecked. The Council has decided that Earth cannot remain part of this order." I looked past him, into the chamber, where the last few delegates were still gathering their things. Some of them glanced at me with something close to pity. Others looked afraid, as if I might suddenly grow a second head and attack them where they stood. "Do you understand what this means?" Vel Thurak asked, when I said nothing. "I think I understand it better than you do," I said quietly. He tilted his head, the closest his kind came to showing confusion. "Your species will lose access to our trade routes. Your ships will not be allowed to dock at any council station. Your colonies beyond your own solar system will not be protected by council law. You will be alone." I nodded slowly. "Alone," I said. "Yes, I heard you the first time." He seemed to expect me to argue, to beg, to ask for one more chance, the way our ambassadors had done in the past. Instead, I simply folded the data slate and placed it inside my coat. "Is there anything you wish to say to the Council before you leave?" he asked. I thought about that question for a long moment. There was so much I could have said. I could have reminded him that humanity had asked for peace 100 times and been mocked for it. I could have reminded him that every weapon we built only after watching other species use theirs against smaller worlds that could not defend themselves. I could have told him that fear was not the same thing as danger. But none of that would matter anymore, not after today. "No," I said instead. "I think the Council has said quite enough." He studied me for a moment, and something in his posture shifted, though I could not read alien body language well enough to know what it meant. Perhaps it was uncertainty. Perhaps it was the first small seed of doubt. "You should know," he added, almost gently, "this decision was not made out of cruelty. Many members of this council believe it is a mercy. Your species is young. Perhaps time apart will allow you to grow without endangering others." "A mercy," I repeated, and I could not stop the corner of my mouth from lifting slightly. "Is that what you call it?" He did not answer. Perhaps he sensed that I was not truly asking him. I walked out of that building alone, past rows of alien guards who did not bother to escort me the way they once had. My footsteps echoed down halls built from stone, brought from 100 different worlds, halls that no human would ever be allowed to walk through again. Outside, the sky above the council world was violet and streaked with thin silver clouds. My personal shuttle waited on the landing platform, its engines already humming. My pilot, a woman named Laura Bennett, stood at the base of the ramp with her arms crossed and a look on her face that told me she already knew. "They did it," she said, not as a question. "They did it," I confirmed. She let out a breath through her nose, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "How bad is it?" "Total banishment," I said. No trade, no protection, no membership. Effective at the next solar rotation. Laura's eyebrows lifted slightly, and for a moment I thought she might be worried. Then, slowly, a small and strange smile crossed her face. "Do they have any idea what they just did?" she asked. "I don't think they do," I said. "Not yet." We boarded the shuttle together, and as the engines lifted us off the platform, I looked back one last time at the great glass towers of the council world, glowing faintly under that violet sky. Somewhere behind those windows, alien leaders were already celebrating what they believed was a victory. They believed they had clipped the wings of a dangerous young species before it could grow any further. They did not understand that every rule they had placed on us for the last 60 years had been a leash, and they had just unclipped it with their own hands. As our shuttle rose higher, breaking through the thin outer atmosphere, I opened a secure channel back to Earth. It took several seconds for the signal to stabilize across the distance, but when it did, a familiar voice answered immediately, as if she had been waiting by the receiver the entire time. "Daniel," said Grace Whitfield, our head of foreign affairs, her voice steady despite the tension I could hear underneath it. "Tell me." "They voted for full banishment," I said. "Immediate and complete. No exceptions." There was a pause on the line, just long enough for me to imagine her closing her eyes and taking a breath. "Understood," she said finally. "Come home, Daniel. We have a lot of work to do." "Yes," I said, watching the stars stretch into long white lines as our shuttle entered faster than light travel. "We certainly do." I leaned back in my seat and let my mind drift over everything that had just happened. For 60 years, humanity had lived under a long list of rules written by species who saw us as a threat to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. We could not build weapons above a certain strength. We could not expand beyond 3 systems from our sun. We could not form alliances without council approval. We could not even choose our own trade partners without asking permission first. Every single one of those rules existed because Earth was a member of the Council, bound by treaties we had signed generations ago in a moment of desperation, when first contact had left our leaders terrified and eager to belong to something larger than ourselves. Today, all of that ended. Laura glanced over at me from the pilot's seat, her eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of the navigation display. "You don't look worried," she said. "Most people would be worried right now." "I am worried," I admitted. "But not for the reason you think. Then what are you worried about?" I looked out at the stars rushing past the viewport, thinking of everything waiting for us back home, and everything that would begin the moment we arrived. "I'm worried about them," I said quietly, "because they just handed us exactly what we've been asking for, and they don't even realize it yet." Laura raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to explain further, but I simply shook my head and smiled. "You'll understand soon enough," I told her. "We all will." The shuttle sailed on through the dark, carrying the news that would change everything, while somewhere far behind us, an entire council of frightened worlds celebrated a decision they believed had made them safe. They had no idea that the true danger had never been our weapons or our ambition. It had always been our patience, and today they had just taken away every single reason we had left to keep showing it. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the shuttle's engine settle into my bones, and I thought back to the first time I had ever entered that council chamber, many years earlier, as a young aide barely old enough to understand the weight of the treaties being signed around me. Even then, I remembered the way alien delegates had looked at our small human delegation, the way their eyes lingered a moment too long, the way their questions always carried a quiet edge of suspicion, no matter how carefully our diplomats answered them. We had never been welcomed into that community. We had been tolerated, watched, and measured against a standard no one had ever clearly explained to us. Every achievement we brought before the council was met not with celebration, but with careful evaluation of how dangerous that achievement might eventually become. I remembered a specific meeting, years before, when our scientists unveiled a new form of long-range communication array capable of connecting our colonies instantly across vast distances. Instead of praise, the Council had spent 3 full sessions debating whether the technology gave humanity an unfair advantage that needed to be restricted before it could spread further. In the end, we were permitted to keep the technology, but only after agreeing to share its complete design specifications with the Council's Central Research Division, a division that never once shared anything of equal value back to us. That pattern repeated itself again and again throughout the decades. Every gift humanity offered the wider galaxy was measured first for its danger, and only afterward for its value. Every step forward we took was shadowed by a dozen careful eyes waiting to see if that step would need to be reversed. Laura glanced toward me from the pilot's seat, noticing the distant look on my face. "You're thinking about something," she said. "I can always tell." "I'm thinking about how long we spent trying to convince them we weren't dangerous," I said quietly, "when the truth is, we were never given a fair chance to show them what we actually were." "And what were we?" she asked. I considered the question carefully before answering. "Careful," I said. "Patient. Willing to wait, because we believed patience would eventually earn us equal standing among the stars." "And now?" Laura asked, guiding the shuttle smoothly through a wide arc as we adjusted course toward the faster-than-light corridor that would carry us home. "Now," I said, watching the stars stretch into long white lines once more, "we no longer have any reason to wait." The shuttle landed at the eastern platform outside our capital just before dawn, and I could already see lights burning in every window of the government building. Nobody in that building had gone to sleep. Word of the vote had reached Earth hours before I did, carried by a faster relay signal that Laura and I could never have outrun. Grace Whitfield met me at the entrance, her coat still buttoned from the cold morning air, her tablet already filled with messages from every department on the planet. She did not waste time on greetings. "The full council session is being replayed on every network," she said, walking quickly beside me down the hall. "People have questions, Daniel. A lot of them are frightened." "They should not be," I said. She stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression sharp. "Easy for you to say. You were in that room. Most people out there only understand one thing right now. We have been thrown out of the only community we have ever known since first contact. That sounds like the end of something, not the beginning." I understood her concern, but I also understood something she did not yet know, something that very few people on Earth understood at that moment, buried as it was in old paperwork nobody had bothered to read in decades. "Gather the Council of Ministers," I told her. "All of them, within the hour." She studied my face for a long moment, searching for the fear she expected to find there. When she did not find it, her posture shifted slightly, curiosity replacing worry. "You know something," she said. "I know something," I confirmed. Within the hour, I stood before every senior minister of Earth's government, inside the central chamber, a room far smaller and far plainer than the council hall I had left behind on that distant world. Yet somehow, it felt more solid beneath my feet. These were people who had spent their entire careers trying to keep humanity safe inside a system that never fully trusted us. I placed the data slate from Vel Thurak on the table in front of me, and I let the room read the verdict for themselves. I watched their faces change as they absorbed the same words I had absorbed hours earlier. Fear, anger, confusion. A few of them looked at me as though I might somehow undo what had already been decided. "Before anyone speaks," I said, raising my hand gently, "I want everyone here to remember something. 60 years ago, when our ancestors first made contact with the wider galaxy, we were desperate. We were frightened of being alone in a universe that suddenly felt far too large and far too dangerous. In that fear, our leaders signed treaties they barely understood, simply to belong to something bigger than us." Several ministers nodded slowly, remembering old history lessons rather than living memory. "Those treaties came with rules," I continued. "Rules about weapons, about expansion, about trade, about nearly everything we do as a species." We accepted those rules because membership in the council felt like our only path to safety. But membership always came at a price, and today, that membership has ended. A minister near the back of the room, a stern man named Ethan Wright who oversaw our defense committee, leaned forward with his arms crossed tightly. "With respect, Daniel," he said, "you are describing our situation as though losing membership is somehow good news. We have lost our protection. We have lost our trade partners. We have lost our voice in galactic matters. How is any of that something to celebrate?" I nodded, because his concern was fair, and because I knew this question would come from every corner of the room before the day was finished. "You are right that we have lost protection under council law," I said. "But ask yourself this, what exactly did that protection ever give us? When pirate fleets raided our outer colonies 11 years ago, did the council send ships to defend us, or did they simply record the incident and issue a formal complaint that changed nothing?" Several ministers exchanged glances, remembering that painful chapter clearly. "When our scientists developed a defense shield capable of protecting entire cities from orbital strikes," I continued, "did the council celebrate our progress, or did they force us to dismantle half of it because it exceeded limits they had placed on us alone? Limits no other species in that chamber was ever required to follow." The room grew quieter. "For 60 years, I said, we have been told that our safety depended on staying small, staying quiet, and staying obedient. We built weaker ships than we were capable of building. We settled fewer worlds than we were capable of settling. We held back nearly everything, because breaking council rules meant risking exactly what happened this morning." I paused and let my eyes move across every face in that room. "They have already taken away the thing we feared losing the most," I said. "There is nothing left to hold back for." A long silence followed, and I could see something shifting behind the eyes of nearly everyone present, as though a great weight had quietly slipped off their shoulders without anyone announcing it out loud. Grace Whitfield was the first to speak. "You are saying the rules that restricted us only applied because we were members," she said slowly, working through the logic herself. "Now that we are banished, those rules no longer apply to us at all." "Exactly," I said. "Every restriction on our weapons, our expansion, our trade agreements, our military strength, all of it existed inside a treaty we are no longer bound by. The council did not simply punish us this morning. They removed the only leash that was ever placed around our neck." Ethan Wright uncrossed his arms slowly, his expression shifting from frustration to something closer to disbelief. "You cannot possibly believe they overlooked something so basic," he said. "I believe," I said carefully, "that the council has spent 60 years viewing humanity as a frightened young species that needed to be managed and controlled. They never imagined we might quietly understand the exact terms of our own imprisonment better than they did." A younger minister near the front, a woman named Clara Bishop who handled scientific development, leaned forward with wide eyes. "If the restrictions are gone," she said, "our research divisions could resume nearly a dozen projects that were shut down years ago. Faster engines, stronger hull materials, weapons systems we were forced to abandon halfway through development." "All of it," I confirmed. "Every project we were told was too advanced, too aggressive, or too dangerous for a species still under council supervision." Grace folded her arms and looked toward the large window overlooking the Capitol, where the sun was finally beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in soft orange light. "This changes everything," she said quietly. "It does," I agreed, "but it also means the entire galaxy is about to discover something they were never prepared for. They believed banishing Earth was a punishment. In truth, they have simply removed the last barrier standing between humanity and the future we were always capable of building." Ethan Wright finally allowed a small, tired smile to cross his face, the first one I had seen since entering that room. "Then I suppose," he said, "our next task is deciding exactly what kind of future that will be." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that question settle over the entire chamber. "Yes," I said, "and I believe we owe the council a response, not a plea for reconsideration, not an apology, a response that makes our position absolutely clear. so there is no confusion about what happens next." Grace turned back toward me, her expression sharpening with quiet determination. "What kind of response are you thinking of, Daniel?" I looked around the room at each minister in turn, at faces that had entered this meeting frightened and were now beginning to understand the true shape of what had just happened. "I am thinking," I said slowly, "that it is time humanity stopped asking for permission and started setting its own terms." The room fell silent again, but this silence felt different from before. It no longer carried fear. It carried the first quiet spark of something the council had never expected to see in us: resolve. Grace nodded once, decisively. "Then let us draft it together," she said. "Every rule we intend to follow from this day forward, and every rule we no longer intend to obey." Over the following hours, ministers from every department gathered around that table, working through the night and into the following day, building something none of us had ever been permitted to build before. Not a request, not a treaty proposal, a declaration. As the final draft came together late that evening, Ethan Wright read the closing lines aloud to the room, his voice steady and clear. "We do not ask the council to reconsider its decision," he read. "We accept it fully, and we thank them for it." A few quiet laughs spread through the room, though none of them carried humor. They carried something closer to relief. I stood near the window, watching the last light of day fade over the Capitol, thinking about Vel Thurak's calm, confident voice as he delivered the verdict earlier that morning. He believed he had ended something. In truth, he had simply opened a door that could never again be closed. Tomorrow, that declaration would be transmitted to every corner of the council's territory, and for the first time in 60 years, humanity would not be speaking as a frightened young species seeking approval. We would be speaking as ourselves. The transmission was scheduled to reach the council world at midday, their time, timed carefully so that every delegate would be present in the chamber to receive it. Grace Whitfield insisted on that detail herself. She wanted no one to be able to claim later that they had missed it, misunderstood it, or heard only a partial account through second-hand reports. I was chosen to deliver the message in person, standing before a small recording camera inside our Capitol building, with every minister gathered silently behind me. Laura Bennett stood near the door, arms crossed, watching me with an expression somewhere between pride and nervous anticipation. "Are you ready?" the technician asked, his finger hovering over the transmission switch. I straightened my coat and looked directly into the camera lens, imagining the faces of 100 different species who would soon be watching this same recording across 100 different worlds. "Ready?" I said. The light on the camera turned green, and I began. "This message is addressed to the Galactic Council and to every species currently represented within it," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Yesterday, your council voted to banish humanity from galactic membership, citing concerns over our military strength, our rate of expansion, and our refusal to disarm according to your standards. We have reviewed your decision carefully, and we wish to respond clearly, so there is no confusion about what happens next." I paused briefly, allowing the weight of that sentence to settle before continuing. "We accept your decision," I said. "We will not appeal it. We will not request reconsideration. We thank you for it." I could imagine the confusion that single sentence would cause across 100 council chambers the moment it was translated into 100 different languages. "For 60 years, I continued, humanity operated under the restrictions placed upon us as a condition of council membership. We limited the strength of our weapons, even as other species maintained fleets far more powerful than anything we were permitted to build. We limited our expansion to a small handful of systems, even as other species claimed entire regions of space without consequence. We limited our research into technologies deemed too advanced for a species still considered young and unpredictable." I let my gaze move slightly, imagining the delegates seated in rows before that recording, listening in silence. "We accepted these limits," I said, "because council membership offered something in return: protection, partnership, a voice in matters that affected the wider galaxy. Yesterday, all of that ended, and so naturally, every restriction that came with it has ended as well. A soft murmur passed through the ministers standing behind me, though none of them spoke aloud. They had heard this reasoning already, during the long night of drafting this very message, yet hearing it spoken now, transmitted outward toward the stars, carried a different weight entirely. Effective immediately, I continued, humanity will resume full research into every technology previously restricted under Council law. This includes advanced propulsion systems, defense architecture, and weapons development at levels equal to those maintained by other member species. I paused again, letting that statement land fully before moving forward. Humanity will also resume expansion into any unclaimed system within reasonable distance of our home world, without requiring approval from any external authority. We will establish new colonies according to our own judgment and our own timeline. Behind me, I heard Ethan Wright shift slightly, his quiet presence a reminder of every conversation that had shaped these words. "We understand," I said, "that some of you fear what humanity might become without the restrictions your council once placed upon us. We wish to address that fear directly, because we believe honesty serves us better than false reassurance." I took a slow breath before continuing. Humanity does not intend to become a threat to species who mean us no harm. We have never sought conflict for its own sake. Every weapon we have ever built existed to defend what belongs to us, not to threaten what belongs to others. This remains true today, and it will remain true tomorrow. I let a brief pause settle before shifting into the section of the message I knew would matter most. "However," I said, "we wish to be equally clear about what will no longer be tolerated. For 60 years, humanity relied on Council law to protect our colonies from raiders, pirates, and hostile factions operating along our borders. That protection is now gone, and so is our obligation to show restraint toward those who threaten what belongs to us." I felt the room behind me grow very still. Any faction that attacks a human colony, any group that threatens a human vessel, and any species that seeks to exploit our current position outside Council law will be met with a response equal to the threat presented. We will not ask the Council to intervene on our behalf, because we no longer expect that intervention to come. We will handle these matters ourselves, according to our own judgment, and we will not require anyone's permission to do so. I allowed a longer pause here, wanting the weight of that sentence to fully settle before continuing. "We also wish to address the matter of trade," I said. "Humanity will no longer honor shipping lanes, trade restrictions, or territorial boundaries established under Council law, except where such boundaries align with our own interests. We will establish new trade relationships directly with any species willing to engage with us honestly and fairly, regardless of that species' current standing within your council." A soft breath escaped from somewhere behind me, quickly suppressed. I recognized it as Clara Bishop. Likely imagining the flood of independent trade opportunities, this single sentence would open across dozens of border worlds, eager to deal with Earth directly. "Finally," I said, "we wish to address something that has never been said clearly to your council in 60 years of membership. Humanity did not join your community because we believed ourselves inferior, nor because we required your guidance to survive. We joined because we were frightened, and fear made us accept terms we never should have accepted in the first place." I felt something steady settle in my chest as I spoke these final lines, something that had been building quietly since the moment Vel Thurak handed me that data slate. "Today, that fear no longer serves any purpose. You have removed the only reason we ever had to accept those terms. We do not view this as an ending. We view this as the moment humanity finally stands as we were always meant to stand, unrestricted, unafraid, and entirely capable of shaping our own future without waiting for anyone's approval." I looked directly into the camera one final time. "This is not a request for reconsideration," I said. "This is a declaration of the terms under which humanity will now exist within this galaxy. We do not ask you to accept them. We simply inform you that they are already in effect." The light on the camera turned red, signaling the end of the recording, and for several long seconds, the entire room remained silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Laura Bennett, who rarely showed nerves of any kind, stood frozen near the doorway, with her arms still crossed tightly against her chest. Grace Whitfield finally broke the silence. "Send it," she said quietly. The technician nodded and pressed the transmission switch, and somewhere far beyond our sky, that message began its long journey outward through the stars, carrying words that no council chamber had ever heard from humanity before. I turned to face the room, watching the weight of what we had just done settle over every face present. Some looked nervous, some looked proud, a few, like Ethan Wright, simply looked satisfied, as though a long overdue conversation had finally taken place. "How long until it reaches them?" Clara Bishop asked. "A few hours," the technician answered. "Perhaps less, depending on relay conditions along the route." Grace turned toward me, her expression steady, despite the tension still lingering in the room. "And how long," she asked, "before we find out how they respond?" I thought about Vel Thurak's calm, confident voice from the day before, and I imagined how that same voice might sound upon hearing every word we had just transmitted across the stars. "I imagine," I said slowly, "that we will not have to wait very long at all." As if summoned by that very thought, a soft chime sounded from the communications terminal near the far wall, indicating an incoming transmission request from beyond our system. The technician glanced toward Grace, silently asking permission to answer. Grace nodded once. The screen flickered to life, and the pale silver face of Vel Thurak appeared before us, his expression unreadable behind the thin translation device clipped near his throat. Behind him, I could see the edges of the great council chamber, filled with delegates whose postures suggested the calm confidence from yesterday had entirely disappeared. "Daniel Cross," Vel Thurak said slowly, his voice carrying none of the composed authority it held during the vote. "The council has received your transmission." "I assumed you would," I said evenly. "You understand," he continued, "that this message will be interpreted by many as a threat." "It is not a threat," I said. "It is a declaration of exactly how humanity intends to move forward now that we are free of every restriction your council placed upon us. We are simply making certain there is no confusion about our position." Behind Vel Thurak, I could see several delegates leaning toward one another, their expressions tense, their body language carrying none of the calm certainty they displayed during yesterday's vote. "Many members of this council," Vel Thurak said carefully, "did not anticipate this response." "I imagine you did not," I said. "For 60 years, your council viewed humanity as a young, frightened species that needed guidance and restriction to remain safe. You never imagined we understood the exact terms of our own treaty well enough to recognize what banishment would truly mean." Vel Thurak's posture shifted slightly, something I still could not fully read, though I suspected it carried the weight of genuine uncertainty. "The council did not intend to release you from every restriction," he said. "This decision was meant to isolate your species, not to grant it freedom." "And yet," I said calmly, "that is precisely what it has done." A long silence stretched between us across the vast distance separating our two worlds. "What do you intend to do now?" Vel Thurak finally asked, and for the first time since I had met him, his voice carried something close to genuine concern. I glanced briefly at Grace, at Ethan Wright, at Clara Bishop, and at every minister standing quietly behind me, each of them representing the countless decisions humanity would now make entirely on our own terms. "We intend to grow," I said simply, "without asking permission from anyone ever again." The screen went dark shortly after. The connection ended from the other side, though whether from anger, confusion, or simple uncertainty, I could not say for certain. Grace stepped up beside me, watching the blank screen for a long moment before speaking. "Well," she said quietly, "I suppose that answers one question." "What question is that?" I asked. "Whether they understood the mistake they made," she said, a small, tired smile finally crossing her face. "I think we can safely say they understand it now." Outside the window, the sun continued its slow rise over the capital, casting long golden light across a planet that, for the first time in 60 years, belonged entirely to itself. 6 months passed before I saw the true shape of what our declaration had set in motion, and I saw it firsthand aboard a vessel named the Meridian, humanity's newest deep space cruiser, built using engine designs our scientists had been forbidden from completing for over a decade. I stood on its bridge as its commanding officer. A calm and sharp woman named Megan Shaw guided us toward the outer edge of a system 3 times farther from Earth than any human colony had ever been permitted to settle. "Approach complete," Megan said, her eyes fixed on the navigation display. "We are entering orbit around the 4th planet now." I stood beside her, watching the pale blue world grow larger on the main screen, a planet our scouts had identified months earlier as ideal for settlement, rich in resources, and free of any competing claims from other species. "Under the old rules," I said quietly, "we would never have been allowed to come this far." "Under the old rules," Megan replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "Half the systems we've already surveyed would still be marked as forbidden territory. Since the day our declaration reached the Council, humanity had expanded faster than at any point in our history. New colonies had been established in systems that were once far beyond our permitted boundary. Research divisions once restricted to limited testing now operated at full capacity, developing propulsion systems, defense technology, and communication networks that rivaled anything the Council itself possessed. It was not expansion built on carelessness or aggression, however. Every colony we established followed careful planning, respectful of any other life we encountered, and mindful of resources for future generations. We were not trying to conquer the galaxy. We were simply, finally, allowed to grow at the pace we had always been capable of. Not every reaction to our declaration had been calm, however, and it did not take long before that reality reached us directly. 3 months into our expansion, a smaller trading vessel operating near one of our new border colonies sent a distress signal that reached the Meridian just before we departed for our current mission. A group of raiders, operating outside any recognized authority, had begun targeting vessels along the edge of human territory, likely believing that a species newly cut off from Council protection would be an easy target. Megan Shaw had been the one to respond to that first distress call, and I had been aboard the Meridian at the time, present for what followed. The raiders had approached the trading vessel with confidence, expecting no resistance and no consequences. What they encountered instead was a heavily reinforced Earth cruiser capable of neutralizing their entire operation within minutes, its weapons systems built using technology we had spent years developing in secret, technology the Council had once forbidden us from completing. I remembered standing on the bridge that day, watching Megan calmly issue orders as the Meridian moved to intercept the raiders before they could reach the defenseless trading vessel. "They are hailing us," the communications officer said, glancing toward Megan for instruction. "Let them speak," Megan replied. The raider leader's voice crackled through the speakers, confident and mocking. "You're a bit far from home, aren't you? Word says your little planet doesn't have any friends left to protect you anymore." Megan's expression did not change. "We do not require protection," she said calmly. "We require you to leave this system immediately, or we will remove you from it ourselves." A short laugh followed, big words for a species that just got kicked out of the only club that mattered. "You misunderstand your situation," Megan said, her voice steady and calm. "This is not a request." The raider vessel fired first, a single warning shot meant to intimidate rather than damage, clearly expecting the Meridian to retreat. Instead, Megan issued a single, calm order, and within moments, the raiders' engines were disabled with a precision strike that left their vessel drifting harmlessly in space, unable to flee or continue their attack. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 minutes. Word of that incident spread quickly across border systems, carried by traders and travelers who had witnessed the aftermath firsthand. Humanity, once viewed as a species too restricted and too cautious to defend its own colonies effectively, had suddenly demonstrated capability far beyond what anyone outside our world had expected. More incidents followed in the months after, each one testing our resolve in different ways. A hostile faction attempted to claim one of our newly established mining outposts, believing our lack of council protection made the colony vulnerable. They were met with swift, disciplined resistance that ended the conflict before it could escalate into anything larger. Another group attempted to intercept one of our supply convoys along a border route, only to discover that our escort vessels carried defense systems far more advanced than anything they had encountered from Earth before. Each time, the response from humanity was the same: firm, controlled, effective, never excessive, never cruel, but always more than enough to end the threat quickly and permanently. Word began to spread across neighboring systems that Earth, once considered the weakest member of the Council, had somehow become one of the most capable and self-sufficient forces along the galactic border, all without a single ally or protector standing behind us. I remember discussing this shift with Clara Bishop during a brief visit back to Earth, sitting together in her research office surrounded by data screens filled with new technological breakthroughs achieved in record time. "It is strange," she said, looking up from her console, "how quickly things changed once we stopped waiting for permission." "Strange," I agreed, "but not surprising. We were never actually behind other species in ability. We were simply forced to hold ourselves back." "And now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "we are finally allowed to be exactly who we always were." Clara smiled faintly and returned to her work, and I found myself thinking about how differently this entire situation might have unfolded if the Council had simply understood the true nature of the treaty they had written so long ago. Back aboard the Meridian, as our new colony ship prepared to establish its first settlement on the pale blue world before us, Megan turned toward me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think they regret it yet?" she asked. "The Council, I mean." I considered her question carefully before answering. "I think," I said slowly, "some of them are beginning to understand the size of the mistake they made. Whether they regret it fully, however, is a different question entirely." "And if they do regret it," she asked, "what happens then?" I looked out at the pale blue planet growing steadily closer on the view screen, thinking of everything humanity had accomplished in only a few short months of true independence. "Then," I said quietly, "they will have to come to us and ask what happens next." Megan studied me for a moment, then turned back toward her console, guiding the Meridian gently into a stable orbit above our newest colony site. Neither of us knew, at that moment, exactly how soon that day would come. Before that day arrived, however, one final test came our way, one that would settle any remaining doubt about humanity's ability to stand alone. It happened 3 weeks after the Meridian established its new colony on that pale blue world, when a larger and far better organized force approached one of our oldest border settlements, a mining colony named Fallridge Station that had operated peacefully for nearly 2 years. I was aboard the Meridian when the distress call came through, and Megan Shaw wasted no time changing course toward the threatened colony. This was no small band of opportunistic raiders. Scans revealed a coordinated fleet of 6 armed vessels, organized and disciplined, clearly testing whether humanity's new independence was built on genuine strength or simply bold words with nothing behind them. "They outnumber us," the tactical officer reported, studying the readings with a tight expression. "Their weapons technology appears comparable to our own defense fleet." Megan studied the display for a long moment, her expression calm despite the numbers before her. "Send a warning transmission," she said. "Tell them to withdraw immediately." The response came quickly, delivered by a gruff voice carrying open confidence. "Your colony has no protection anymore. We know exactly what happened to your people last year. There is no Council fleet coming to save you this time." "There never was one coming to save us," Megan replied calmly over the open channel. "We have always protected what belongs to us. This will be no different." The enemy commander laughed, clearly unconvinced, and ordered his fleet to advance toward Fallridge Station. What followed was not a display of aggression, but a display of precision. Megan coordinated with 2 additional Earth vessels already stationed nearby, and together they executed a defense pattern developed over the past year specifically for situations exactly like this one. Rather than meeting the enemy fleet head-on, Our ships used their superior maneuverability to isolate the enemy vessels one at a time, disabling their weapons and engines with careful, controlled strikes that avoided unnecessary destruction wherever possible. Within 20 minutes, 4 of the 6 enemy vessels drifted powerless in space, their crews unharmed but their mission thoroughly ended. The remaining 2 vessels retreated without further resistance, carrying word back to whatever faction had sent them that Earth's colonies were no longer an easy target, if they ever truly had been. News of that encounter spread even faster than the previous incidents, carried across a dozen border systems by traders eager to share the story of a coordinated attack fleet defeated by a handful of Earth vessels without a single colony casualty. For the first time since our banishment, other species began referring to humanity not as a species cut loose and vulnerable, but as one that had quietly become one of the most capable independent forces along the entire border region. Megan turned to me once the battle had concluded, watching the retreating enemy vessels disappear into the darkness beyond our sensor range. "That should answer any remaining questions," she said quietly. "I imagine it will," I said, watching Fallridge Station's lights flicker back to full operation as its crew resumed their work, unharmed and secure. It arrived less than a year later, in the form of a formal request for a diplomatic meeting, transmitted directly from the Galactic Council to Earth's central government. I read the message myself, standing in Grace Whitfield's office as she handed me the tablet containing the request, her expression carrying a mixture of satisfaction and quiet disbelief. "They are asking for a meeting," she said. "Not a summons, not a demand, a request." I read through the message carefully, noting the careful, measured language used throughout, so different from the confident tone the Council had carried during the day of our banishment. "They want to discuss renewed cooperation," I said, scanning the final paragraph. "They are proposing a new framework for relations between Earth and the Council." Grace crossed her arms, watching me closely. "What do you think prompted this?" I thought back over the past year, over everything humanity had accomplished since the day of our banishment. 3 new colonies established beyond our previous boundaries, each thriving under careful, independent management. A defense fleet capable of protecting every border system without assistance from any outside power. Trade agreements formed directly with a dozen smaller species who had grown tired of the Council's restrictive policies and welcomed the opportunity to deal with humanity on equal terms. A steady stream of technological breakthroughs that had, within a single year, closed a gap that once took generations to bridge. "I think," I said slowly, "the balance of power in this region of space has shifted more than the Council expected, and they are no longer comfortable with how quickly that shift occurred." Grace nodded slowly. "Ethan believes several smaller species are considering forming trade agreements with us instead of remaining loyal to Council oversight. If that continues, the Council's influence in this entire sector could weaken considerably. And they cannot allow that to happen quietly," I said, "not without at least attempting to bring us back into their fold, where they can once again exert some measure of control." Grace handed me a second tablet, this one containing our government's internal discussion regarding how to respond to the Council's request. "The ministers have already discussed this at length," she said. "They want you to lead the delegation, Daniel. You were present the day this all began. It seems fitting that you should be present for whatever comes next." I accepted the assignment without hesitation, and within 2 weeks, I found myself once again standing inside the great chamber of the Galactic Council, though this time, everything about the atmosphere in that room felt entirely different. Vel Thurak greeted me personally at the entrance, his posture noticeably less composed than it had been during our previous encounters. "Daniel Cross," he said, his voice carrying a note of genuine respect I had not heard from him before. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Of course," I said evenly. "Humanity values open communication, even with those who once believed banishing us was in everyone's best interest." He did not respond immediately, and I noticed a faint shift in his expression, something close to quiet acknowledgement of that fact. Inside the chamber, delegates from across the galaxy watched as I took my place at the center podium, the very spot where I had once stood to receive the verdict of our banishment. Now, I stood there again, not as a frightened representative seeking approval, but as a voice for a species that had proven, decisively, that it required no one's permission to thrive. "Members of the Council," Vel-Thurak began, addressing the chamber formally, "we have gathered today to discuss renewed relations between this council and the people of Earth." A murmur passed through the assembled delegates, some curious, some clearly uncomfortable with the direction this meeting was already taking. "Before we begin," I said, raising my hand slightly to draw the chamber's attention, "I would like to make something clear so there is no confusion moving forward." Vel-Thurak gestured for me to continue, and the chamber quieted to listen. "1 year ago," I said, "this council voted to banish humanity from galactic membership, believing that action would weaken and isolate our species. Instead, that decision removed every restriction placed upon us for the past 60 years, and allowed humanity to grow, expand, and develop at a pace we were always capable of, had we simply been permitted to do so." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, though none interrupted. "We do not view your invitation today as an opportunity to return to our previous arrangement," I continued. "We have no interest in accepting restrictions on our weapons, our expansion, or our trade relationships ever again. If this council wishes to establish a relationship with Earth moving forward, it will happen entirely on new terms, terms that reflect exactly who we have proven ourselves to be over this past year." A tall alien delegate near the front of the chamber, representing one of the larger member species, spoke up sharply. "You speak as though Earth now holds equal standing with species who have existed far longer than your own. That is a bold assumption for such a young civilization to make." I turned toward him calmly. "It is not an assumption," I said. "It is a fact, demonstrated clearly over the past year, through independent expansion, independent defense capability, and independent trade relationships formed without a single restriction imposed by this council. We did not ask to prove ourselves capable of standing alone. You forced that proof upon us, and we delivered it." The delegate fell silent, clearly unable to counter the simple truth behind my statement. "What terms," Vel-Thurak asked carefully, "would humanity require in order to consider any form of renewed relationship with this council?" I had spent many nights preparing for this exact question, discussing every possible term with Grace Whitfield, Ethan Wright, Clara Bishop, and every minister who had stood beside me since the day of our banishment. I laid out our position clearly, point by point, allowing the entire chamber to hear exactly what humanity now expected. "First," I said, "Earth will not accept any restriction on the strength or development of our defense technology. We will maintain full independence over how we protect our colonies and our people." Vel-Thurak nodded slowly, and several delegates exchanged uncertain glances. "Second," I continued, "Earth will not accept any limit on our expansion into unclaimed territory. We will continue to establish new colonies according to our own judgment, respecting the boundaries of other established species, but requiring no approval to do so." A quiet murmur passed through the chamber once more, though no one objected outright. "Third," I said, "any trade agreements between Earth and other species will be negotiated directly and independently, without requiring council approval or oversight. We welcome partnership with any species willing to engage honestly and fairly on equal terms." I paused briefly before delivering the final and most important term. "Finally," I said, "should any species within this council, or beyond it, threaten harm against a human colony or vessel, Earth reserves the right to respond according to our own judgment, without waiting for council authorization and without fear of consequence from this body for doing so." The chamber remained silent for a long moment following that final statement, the weight of it settling over every delegate present. Vel-Thurak studied me carefully, and I could see something behind his pale silver eyes that had not been present during our first meeting, a quiet mixture of respect and understanding. "These are significant terms," he said finally. "They are the terms under which humanity now exists," I said calmly. "We do not offer them as a negotiation. We offer them as a statement of fact. Any relationship this council wishes to build with Earth must begin from this understanding. Vel-Thurak turned toward the assembled delegates, many of whom appeared to already understand that resistance to these terms would accomplish little, given everything humanity had already proven over the past year. The council will need time to discuss these terms privately, he said finally. Of course, I said. Earth is in no hurry. We have waited 60 years for a relationship built on equal standing. We can certainly wait a little longer for this council to catch up. A few quiet sounds echoed through the chamber, something close to nervous laughter from certain delegates, though I could not be certain whether it stemmed from amusement or discomfort. As the meeting concluded and delegates began filing out to discuss our terms privately, Vel-Thurak approached me once more, his expression thoughtful. "May I ask you something, Daniel Cross?" he said quietly. "Of course," I replied. "Did you know," he asked, "when this council voted for banishment, that this outcome was possible? Did your people understand, even then, what freedom from our restrictions would allow you to become?" I considered his question carefully, remembering that quiet morning outside the chamber doors, the calm certainty I had felt even as delegates around me celebrated what they believed was our downfall. "I suspected it," I said honestly. "I did not know exactly how quickly we would grow, or how thoroughly we would prove ourselves capable. But I understood, even then, that your council had spent 60 years fearing what humanity might become, without ever truly understanding what we already were." Vel-Thurak nodded slowly, something close to quiet respect settling over his expression. "And what is that?" he asked. "What were you all along that this council failed to see?" I thought about that question for a long moment, thinking of every colony established, every threat repelled, every technological breakthrough achieved over the past year, all without a single ally standing beside us. "Capable," I said simply. "We were always capable. You simply gave us permission to prove it." Vel-Thurak said nothing further, and I watched him turn slowly to rejoin the remaining delegates still discussing our terms within the great chamber. I stepped outside into the violet sky of the council world, the same sky I had walked beneath 1 year earlier, believing then that I was witnessing the end of humanity's place among the stars. I understood now that I had witnessed something else entirely. Not an ending, but a beginning. The moment humanity finally stepped forward as exactly who we were always meant to become. Behind me, inside that great chamber, an entire council of frightened worlds debated how to approach a species they had once believed they controlled completely. Ahead of me, across the vast and endless dark, humanity continued to grow, unrestricted, unafraid, and entirely certain of the path we now walked alone. They had tried to banish us into weakness. Instead, they had simply set us free.